If you have a product-led growth model, you are actually all the ingredients that you need to also improve your retention because you're so close to the customers already on acquisition. So why wouldn't you do this also on product development and not just like a growth development?
Yeah.
And I think it's a big missed opportunity.
Yeah, I actually think about it coming from the other angle, which is that for product-led growth to work and for the acquisition piece to work, you need an incredible core experience. You need a core product that's fantastic, an experience around that. That's the thing that then drives your customers to be happy, to then talk about it. It sounds like you were referred or recommended at least by Elena. That only results if the product and the experience itself is really fantastic. You kind of build the company from the product outwards. Everything sort of radiates and emanates from the product outwards, including your marketing strategy and your acquisition channels and every little viral loop and every growth technique kind of all radiates out from the product and kind of comes back to the product.
Get ready for the ProducTea with Leah, your fun-sized dose of business, tech, growth, and product chatter. I'm your host, Leah, and it's time to spill the tea. Welcome to the ProducTea. Today, I'm hosting a special guest, a man who's so good at growth, his title cannot be contained to just one head of a role. He's worn the hats of head of growth, product, marketing, and analytics. And if you see his majestic mane, you know why he's called head of growth. From Superhuman to startup consulting, this UK-born and San Francisco-based growth guru has turned more zeros into millions than a skilled mathematician. So let's give it up for the Samson of SaaS, the long-haired leader of launches, Gaurav Vohra. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. That was the best introduction. I could far surpass my expectations. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so happy that you liked it. That's the minimum that we expect as well, right? Like we want to only do the good things here. Can you introduce yourself to the fools that may not know you?
Absolutely, will do. So my name is Gaurav, as you mentioned, UK born and raised, currently based in San Francisco, lead growth and analytics at the moment at Superhuman. I also am an advisor to startups ranging from seed to Series B. I growth advise, and depending on what the startup needs, that could either be marketing, products, analytics, or some combination of all of the above.
That is really cool. So let me introduce you back to the audience in regards to like what your relevance is to me.
Yeah.
Your brother is really annoying. He's constantly in my inbox telling me how to use your product called Superhuman. And I receive like one email per day with him. I don't know exactly why that is the case. Like your growth loops are relatively... They're relatively aggressive, these entire loops.
Yeah.
But so I've been using Superhuman for, I don't know, like I think it's now 2 months. I'm not sponsored by this, right? Like, I'm not sponsored by Superhuman. I don't have a free subscription. I'm paying like every other peasant for this. But I'm a huge, huge fan. And then I started to reach out also to Arul and then asked him like, hey, do you want to do an episode? Then I think you also came in and then we figured out, okay, you're actually siblings. So what's the deal with that? Like, how is it to work with a brother in this regard? What's the deal there?
Yeah, amazing. I would say working with a sibling it comes with incredible high highs. I think you could say there are some low lows, but the bounce back, I think, is a lot faster, right? I think that unlike working with some random Joe Schmo as your manager, where maybe the low lows really suck, and then you're like, that's it. When it's your family, you know what the recourse is, right? Like you've been there before, whether it was when they kicked your ass at Mortal Kombat or whether it was like Legos or something like that. You know how to bounce back from the situation, or at least you believe that there is a path. Working with families is great. It's a huge privilege and a pleasure. It's been 8 years that we've been working together on Superhuman. Yep. And I thought it was hilarious that you say that he's in your inbox, because in fact, I am in your inbox as the creator of those emails and growth loops. I obviously just signed them with his name because of brand relevance. That was quite amusing. I'm also happy to explain our extremely aggressive growth loop to get you an email every single day, sometimes multiple emails in the first week on a given day. Superhuman is a product of onboarding and learning, right? And so instead of just letting you space out in the first week and say, that was nice, I'll go back to Gmail, we really want you to come back, right? So we send you a message every single day, unveiling the next new amazing feature that you may or may not know about.
Okay, let's talk about this briefly right after. And I think there's a lot of interesting things that we can talk about Superhuman because it's highly relevant also for product-led growth. But maybe before we jump into this. So 2 questions. The first one is, you mentioned Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite character that you always play in everyone?
I was a very big Liu Kang fan.
Okay. So specifically, Raiden tells you a lot about how I think about product as well.
Okay.
Because he had always like these super shitty moves where you just like teleport, right? Like
just right next to you, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like always the tricky stuff. And I'm also an avid card player and like everything that I play is always like I always play the tricky characters, like the difficult stuff. I
Yeah.
really love surprising people with stuff. And
Like
I
showing,
like
like
to think,
teleporting right next to them.
yeah, exactly. Like and challenging just like known notions, right? So like everybody told me that, look, this is how you should do product. I just
Right. Yeah.
always challenged things and never was happy with the way that things are. And I guess here we are. But yeah, this episode is not about Mortal Kombat though. So let me ask you like one final private question to you. What do people usually get wrong about you once they get to know you?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I like to go very deep into different topics, and there are like absolutely there are topics I know nothing about. Right, I'm a complete noob and a novice at. But something that's comes up is sort of like it's very easy to get pigeonholed and like put into one box and say, oh, well, this person's really good at like SQL, so therefore that's like all they know, and they're the data person. But I won't think that they have anything useful or valuable to add. Let's say with social media or with like copy or design or anything like that, right? So professionally speaking, I feel like there's a stereotype, right, that people fall into a box and then that's what they do. But I've always pushed to be a bit more generalist, a bit more broad. Maybe I don't go as deep as a true specialist does, but something I really like to do is to go broad and see the connections between different disciplines and areas. Take an engineering principle and apply it to running a customer success team, or take some customer success principle and apply it to how a engineering pod should operate. And so it's that breadth of kind of like, well, actually, there's some interesting kind of learnings from over here. That's something I like to talk about a lot and share with people, because I think there's so many interesting connections and just best practice you can steal from another place and apply to your specific area.
Yeah. Is it bothering you that people get you wrong in this regard, or like
No, it
what
doesn't.
is the deal?
It doesn't actively bother me. It's something that I think is just more of an interesting quirk, right? It's kind of like as companies in particular get larger, conversations need a bit more thought in terms of like who to bring into the conversation or interesting perspective or relevant insights. And so sometimes you find that like a whole conversation's happening or a strategy is being developed and it might be going in completely the wrong direction because of some missing insight or some missing information. For the most part, though, at least at Superhuman, I've tried to create communication channels modeled after other companies that have already done this, like Stripe and others, that kind of default to information is accessible by its very default nature. Like conversations are held in public Slack channels or on email lists where it's very easy for people to jump in and out. And if you are brought in sort of midway through, you can very easily just scroll up and see the prior context. So that way, like you do get the benefit, you get to bring in whoever you want at any point in time.
Okay, so then let's just switch gears right now and go into the main topic, which is, or not the main topic, but like one of the things or the reason why we are speaking in the first place is Superhuman. Let me just introduce you, like what I see Superhuman is, because I actually never really looked into what Superhuman really does until Elena told me, Leah, this tool is really cool. You should try it out. That happened like literally 2 or 3 months ago. And I've never looked back. If you would have told me, would you pay this much money per month for a different email client, something that I hate, like I hate interacting with emails. It really pisses me off. There's so many things that piss me off about Gmail, not just as the tool, but like just like the communication form, like how to keep track of your tasks, how unwieldy it is, and then, like doing stuff on your mobile and then doing it on your desktop and so forth. And the way that I would experience this is that this is hotkey palooza, right? So just for the people who are listening to this and have never heard about this, so what Superhuman is it kind of turns your inbox into a really sleek looking hotkey task manager in some ways. This is how I look at it.
I'm loving hearing this description. This is amazing.
And it really helps me to keep track of the tasks that result of these emails. And it has been so incredibly helpful also on my advising side to keep track of what's important, separating leads and deals and things that I should be paying attention to, because I have a lot of email communication going forward with conferences, like, and you have inbound leads and all that kind of stuff. Then you also have your work emails. It's been one of the best productivity tools that I have introduced in my life. And I don't include a lot of these, right? So like the last one was probably Miro and Notion, just for people to see how awesome this was. And again, I'm not sponsored to say this. I'm not receiving any money for this. This is pure conviction. I'm a huge fan of this tool. And the interesting bit for me from a product-led experience is what Superhuman does really well is the core product you would assume is emails, right? So like communicating with others, but it's actually not really that. It's just like it avoids all of these problems that I usually have with email. I cannot go away from email. I would love to, but I really can't. It just adds this additional layer of keeping track of what is coming from this really big stream of annoyance, which emails just are, and allows me to deal with it. And I would assume, I'm just going to put this out there, that you probably have a very, very healthy LTV in the sense of like once someone stays longer than I would say probably 3 to 4 months, it's very likely that they stay for 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
That's how I would assume that your retention cords look like.
Yeah, that is accurate. I think then other things come into play at certain points, like shifting jobs or switching role, where you move from a primarily email-based workflow to maybe a primarily Slack-based workflow. Like then those events happen in people's lives, every 2 to 3 years or so. But yeah, once you are past the initial kind of activation and then adoption moments, once you know what you can do in Superhuman, you've set up your split inboxes, you've done all of the things to get acclimatized from a muscle memory point of view. Like the second you find yourself back in Gmail or in 365, because we support Outlook as well, you look at your inbox and it's hideous, right? Like how can you possibly go back once you've experienced what it feels like to do your email twice as fast? So yeah, that's definitely something that we hear and we see. So yeah, so I'm really pleased to hear that it's been such a productivity boost
maybe
for you.
One final point on this. So the really interesting bit is that if you're looking at this from a business perspective of like, what is the defendable business here? Mm-hmm. I would assume that Superhuman from a technical perspective is not that hard to copy, right? Like just on the surface in that sense. And I would say this is probably true, but the love here for this particular product is it's everywhere in the details.
Yeah.
It's really slick. And I would say what I love the most about it is not the core product, but the interface and how easy it is to learn. Now, I have a very specific hobby in my free time. I fly fighter jets from the 80s and the 90s, right? So like at least in the simulator. And those are notoriously difficult to learn. So it's not that I'm incapable of learning difficult interfaces. I actually like it, right? So like I have a UX research background in this. But just getting the first 2 to 3 minutes right in any product, so like the time to value, is incredibly important. We keep talking about this everywhere and how crucial that this is. But I really like how you managed to do this, right? So like just like getting this first hotkey, the Control K, this tutorial that you've put up for your product. This is a masterpiece. And I think I really, really like it from the UX's perspective. And I think your defensible moat there is that you will keep improving this particular interface on this. And this is what I really, really like about it.
Yeah. A couple of things that I would also just share as kind of the backdrop philosophically of where all these experiences came from. We have this saying, it goes usually into our board decks and our sort of investor pitches. It's like a big slide, just an image. It's like a person levitating. That's like the image. And the words say, what we make people feel is just as important as what we make, right? It's kind of one of those big motivational statements that we sort of definitely on the product and design team at Superhuman, and certainly with the customer-facing teams and marketing, it's a phrase that's sort of well-known. We care immensely about the feelings generated within our customers, that feeling of lower anxiety, elevated productivity, a feeling of being more on top of your email and your communication. And that is only achieved when you focus on those details, when you focus on the products beyond what a typical email app might focus on. So yes, of course, the product is incredibly important, but the resultant outcome of the product and the experience around that product, all of the touch points with our team, is crucially important. I would also say that technically, Superhuman is pretty complicated, at least from an engineering point of view, when you take into consideration things like offline mode and just the crazy amount of breadth you need to cover when you build an email experience. There's just like so many features that people come to expect in their email app. It is not like one killer feature. Loom, it's like you can record a video and send it. Like that's the feature. Miro, it's like there's the whiteboard and you collaborate on the whiteboard. Email, it's like a whole thing. It's been around for 30, 40 years. There's just so many different subcomponents and features. And there are a lot of features you have to choose to ignore at certain points. So there's a lot of breadth. And I think there is certainly an R&D kind of moat. It just takes 3 to 4 years to build something vaguely passable in the space that covers the basic platforms. But yeah, like similar to Apple, which is another company that we look at a lot and we try and emulate, the best things that we can from Apple. There's this idea of do everything at least 5% better than the next player. And sometimes you do it like 1,000% better, and sometimes you only do it 10% better. But if you do everything better than what your competitors are doing, then the overall experience is elevated, and there's an experience moat in addition to other moats that you may also have.
I think there's a very interesting learning in there that we also had at Small PDF. So we can also briefly talk about the size of Superhuman and like the structuring, just maybe in a second, but like just on this point of what you do special, right? So like what you do a little bit better than the competition. I think one of the really interesting bits that we had back at Small PDF was in 2020, we had about, I would say, 5 to 10 million ARR, way beyond product market fit, very good traction in the market and so forth. And we also started to notice that support is not where we're at. Right? So in a B2C segment like this, where you have probably a far lower LTV than what you're pushing right now, you have the problem that you cannot afford in-person support, at least on the phone, right?
Yeah.
And back then, chatbots were just not up to the task. And we started to look into this and we said, like, okay, so how can we really knock it out of the park for support? And it turned out that the reaction time in regards to when you have a problem with documents, right? So like Small PDF is dealing with documents and so forth, is one of the most leading indicators for good customer happiness. Now, you cannot solve all issues from customers that are coming in through support, but we had a very ambitious OKR, and I remember this relatively vividly. I think our reaction time before the OKR was 18 hours, and we said we're going to push this to 5 minutes in average for each customer request, which meant that we had to have a 24-hour global coverage, of course. It did not matter whether you're a paying customer or whether you're a free user. It does not matter. If you're going to contact us, you're going to get something. And there's also an economic component in this, right? So like if you answer fast to refund requests, then you're not going to get in trouble with MasterCard and Stripe and you know how this goes, right? Like there's a lot of complicated issues there. But just like going into this one thing that you do absolutely fucking perfect is a great differentiator afterwards against your competition. And I think what you also described is the initial onboarding experience. That is something that is relatively easy to copy, but the proof is in the pudding on the retention. And that is this tool really useful afterwards? And that's, I think, what also separates you a little bit from the other tools that I usually know, because usually we are spending in this industry a lot of effort when it comes to acquisition. There's a lot of material out there on how to optimize growth loops, like at the start, right? So like how do you onboard users very well? But there's very little material about how to get retention right.
Right.
And I think my core hypothesis is still, and it's also how I teach and advise, if you have a product-led growth model, you are actually all the ingredients that you need to also improve your retention because you're so close to the customers already on acquisition. So why wouldn't you do this also on product development and not just like a growth development?
Yeah.
And I think it's a big missed opportunity.
Yeah, I actually think about it coming from the other angle, which is that for product-led growth to work and for the acquisition piece to work, you need an incredible core experience. You need core product that's fantastic, an experience around that. That's the thing that then drives your customers to be happy, to then talk about it. It sounds like you were referred or recommended at least by Elena. That only results if the product and the experience itself is really fantastic. You kind of build the company from the product outwards. Everything sort of radiates and emanates from the product outwards, including your marketing strategy and your acquisition channels and every little viral loop and every growth technique kind of all radiates out from the product and kind of comes back to the product. Also, sorry, I was also smiling earlier when you talked about the response time, because our delight team, we don't call our support team a support team. We call it a delight team.
That is fancy. That is very fancy.
Yeah, it's great. It's wonderful because they do provide support, but they also go way above and beyond support. They do so much more. Their OKR is actually 5 minutes as well. They have 2. 75% of emails responded in less than 2 hours. And then I can't remember the percentage, but there's a percent they aspire to respond to in less than 5 minutes as well. Even if it's like an acknowledgement or just a kind of like, hey, I'm going to get back to you. But if it's the whole solution, then it just knocks the socks off the customer. And what we've always said there is we want the experience of interacting with Superhuman to be surprisingly joyful, right? Like pleasant surprise, but you're a little kind of like taken off guard by just like how good it was. And being surprisingly fast with support responses is certainly one way of doing that just, 99% of companies don't do.
Yep.
Many companies don't even have a support channel, or they actively dissuade you from being able to find the support
channel.
Yes.
Yeah, they make it hard to get in contact with an actual human.
Yeah, we have about 10 or 15 different ways of getting in touch with us in the product and outside.
Yeah, well, actually, so your fake brother that does not exist in my mailbox is one of them. So, so that's good to know.
Every single one of those
So-
you can reply to.
Yeah, well, okay, good. This is the thing. Like when we talk about really going above and beyond the expectations from customers, and I think this is not just like to give a good impression. What it actually also can do, specifically, if you think about an example where a customer is really in dire need, they have an actual problem that is very critical. And this happens also for products like ours. So, for instance, at Small PDF, we had always this kind of example of the student or the master student that has finished their thesis and then they cannot submit it to the university server because there's either something going wrong with our product or it's just too big, right? They need assistance from someone to get this through and they just have 15 minutes.
Right.
They are in a panic mode. Something goes completely crazy. They're not expecting us to answer within 15 minutes, but they're going to write to support anyways because what else are they going to do? And then if they hear back in 5 minutes, you not only have won a customer for life because you have actually surpassed their expectations, but they will also start to recommend you. So when we talk about word of mouth, we're not just talking about the people who just say like, oh, yeah, this is a 9 out of 10. I always have problems with NPS surveys, by the way, right? So like I'm a public hater of the NPS. There is a difference between people who like your product really a lot and those that absolutely love it and just keep mentioning it everywhere where they can. I do not recommend a lot of products for a very specific reason because I want people to know that when I do recommend something, that it comes with conviction. It's almost like these people on Substack. I also have a Substack, by the way. It's almost like these people on Substack that just recommend 20 other Substacks.
Right.
It's like, no, you're not reading these 20 people. It's just not possible. Like, hey, to which restaurant should I go in San Francisco? Oh, here's a list of like 200. Look, here's where you can go. Like, no, you've never been at all of these. Just give me 2 and then let it be, right?
Right.
And that's how I look at it a little bit.
One thing I'm curious about, did you get any kind of onboarding assistance? Did you go to a one-on-one conversation? Did you go to a group conversation?
I did not.
Okay.
So I totally did not. No, I still have it. I should.
Yeah, this is music to my ears, honestly, because, one of the biggest projects we've been working on over the last, I'd call it like 18 months now, has been transitioning Superhuman's very famous at this point concierge one-on-one onboarding experience, where, I kid you not, we've one-on-one onboarded hundreds of thousands of people to Superhuman. We've gone through a 30-minute kind of hands-on training session where we really take in the problem, really understand your email workflow, and then get you set up for success. And we've transitioned that over to software, right? We've made it such that the product, those first few minutes that you mentioned, and also the emails and everything else that comes after kind of does that on automation. Then we have the same concierge experience available kind of passively if folks would like it, but also more geared towards potentially some of those team accounts or those kind of larger customers where we're selling more to businesses. So we still have that functionality and that capability, but we've, on the product growth front, been working really hard at pushing all of that into kind of automated in-product moments and touch points. So it's music to my ears to hear that you've kind of rocked the core essence of the product without having actually spoken to someone.
So far, I just gave you praise. So
Uh-oh.
Let's play the dark music then. So it's not the criticism, but like I have 2 questions. But maybe first, before we go into these more critical questions, maybe just for people to get the size of Superhuman, I think my research is you are roughly at 150 people. You're still a Series C. You received considerable funding as well, relatively recently. How are you set up right now? Like how's the company doing?
Yeah, we're actually less than 150. We're 100 people, maybe 98, something at last count. You are correct. We have raised our Series C. That was a couple of years ago. We're set up like you would imagine a product-led growth company to be set up. So I think about half the company is R&D and the other half is go-to-market and operations. Maybe we're a little bit larger, slightly larger on the go-to-market side, particularly on customer success and delight, than a typical company might be. Like a typical PLG company might be fairly lean on that front, right? Trying to really minimize expenditure on people and really focusing on R&D and making the product better. But we have a decent chunk of the team that is geared towards making the experience really amazing for customers. And then operations, maybe that remaining 50% is probably like 70-30 or something in terms of go-to-market and more internal operations teams. And yeah, I'll pause there. It's probably more I could go into, but I'm curious. Did that cover what you were saying?
No. But it is interesting because you're really at a stage where I think we usually cite Dunbar's number, right? Like about at 150 people, you start to just not recognize people anymore on the floors. You also said in the pre-talk that you love going to the office. I hope it's an office where also other people work. Just like,
well, some days in a week. So we do have an office in San Francisco, but we're only about 30%. The company is based in the Bay Area. The remaining 70% is all over Canada, USA. We have some in Mexico. We have some in Latin America. We've mostly tried to stick to these sorts of time zones. Maybe there's sort of one or two people at any point in time, either in Hawaii or over in Europe, but the bulk of us are sort of in the Americas. But yeah, the office is relatively quiet. We're remote first. We're fully distributed. And there'll be like 1 or 2 days a week where there's a decent chunk of people. And then we'll fly a lot of people in for like once a quarter, planning or hack week or whatever it might be. So then you'll see like between 30 and 50 people. But even then, that's still only like less than half of the company in one place. So yeah, we are very much
but still,
remote first.
it's a manageable number. So I always joke about like Leah does not work in companies, or at least in an operative role, I don't work in companies that are bigger than 250, because usually that's when you have to start to have product ops.
Right.
And product ops is for me like just to admit to defeat that you cannot manage your processes anymore. Sorry, product ops people. I always say this, like, they're okay. I love product ops people, but not with me. I just don't want to be there. Okay, so here's a difficult question for you, the first one. And it's up to you how much you want to answer from it. But I would imagine that, let's rewind the clock a little bit and go back to when you were having to raise your first round. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that if it's probably was already clear that you're building something on top of Gmail, as relatively close to the vision that you have today, even though that was a couple of years ago. So if I would have been sitting there as an investor, I would have asked you, wait, you're telling me you want to build a plugin for Gmail. What if they take away the access? Mm-hmm. Or what if Gmail, well, okay, nobody would say that Gmail becomes insignificant, but you're still a little bit at the whim of Gmail.
Yeah.
How did you convince people to invest money? I'm glad you did, right? Like, I love your tool, so don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But were these difficult conversations, coming up at all?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of thoughts there. So I'll answer the sort of surface level version of it, and then I can go a little deeper as well, like the layer underneath. So we certainly do build on top of Gmail. We're reliant on the Gmail API, right, to receive and send email. The same is true over on the Outlook side, right? So there's Outlook APIs that we use as well. And indeed, if those companies wanted to shut off access, they could, I suppose. Now, the challenge for them, if they were to do that, well, there's lots of challenges. I mean, for starters, there would be very many unhappy people, lots of influential people who work in tech who, would be up in arms about yes, exactly that, the shutoff. There's actually a funny story of when Google was about to deprecate a technology that we critically rely on, and we happened to be one of the only users of said technology. It's not the Gmail API, it's something to do with Chrome. But because Google's actually very user-friendly when it comes to deprecating technology, if there is even a single user in the world who uses that technology, they'll have a whole 12-month minimum kind of deprecation notice plan. Google's actually very good about that. So we were able to get a few people in tech to say, look, you can't deprecate this technology. We're actual users of it through this service called Superhuman. But anyway, Google's really good about not turning things off if there are users using it. That's one thing. And I think Outlook would be the same as well. Microsoft would be the same. But here's the thing. We're using the same APIs that basically all the other mail apps are using, right? So you can plug your mail app, which is produced by Apple on your phone, into either of those two mail services, and they're using those APIs as well. And if you're Gmail, right, if you're Google Gmail, you do not want to switch off that API because you have, at this point, maybe hundreds of millions, maybe, dare I say, 1 billion or so users using your product, but through a service like Mail App or like Superhuman. And it does not make sense to turn off that API or that access. You are the pipes of the internet at that point, right? Like, you become an infrastructure layer. Yes, they also have their UI, their gmail.com experience, and the Gmail app on iPhone. But those are not core investments or surface areas for the company. And the company is an ad company, it's a search company. They don't charge or monetize for their UI around email. For them, email is a service. It's a huge part of what they do, but it's not a core investment area, and it's not one that they want to sort of outcompete others. I think Google and I think Outlook are very happy, or Microsoft are very happy being kind of the infrastructural layer at this point and continuing to operate in that way. I will also say that there's an analogy to what we're doing with people who build on top of the internet or people who build on top of roads and other infrastructure that's sort of operated by some other company. Yes, you're at the whims of what they may do, but at a certain point, you may achieve enough scale or enough kind of, as a company, enough cash flow that you can start to build your own services. Like there is a potential future where Superhuman builds its own email kind of system end to end. It's very, very, very many years into the future. It's not a priority for us right now. But when you get to a certain size and scale, like that kind of thing does become possible. But like I said, not something that we're worried about or thinking about actively right now. One thing I will quickly add, so that was like the surface level answer, which may not have been that surface level. This is not the first, obviously not the first company that is built on top of Gmail, right? There are many plugins that sit on top of your email ecosystem. And the funny thing is, and many listeners might know this, you might know this as well, Rahul, my brother, CEO of Superhuman, previously founded a company called Reportive, which was one of the first plugins into the Gmail ecosystem. It was like one of Superhuman's features, basically. It's the sidebar that shows you all the social data about the person you're emailing. Reportive was a plugin into gmail.com and, was loved by tech, right? It was reporters and people doing outreach, salespeople, founders. They all used Reportive because it helped them do email way better. This was back in 2009, 10. 11. And it was acquired by LinkedIn in 2011, later turned into LinkedIn Sales Navigator as part of that acquisition. When kind of fundraising for Superhuman, there was an element of like, hey, we've done this before. Like we know what this looks like. We know what the great outcomes can be. We also know what to avoid. We know what the challenges are, like what not to do. For example, we're not building this as a plugin into gmail.com because they will change that UI and we'll spend like 30% of our engineering time just constantly playing catch up with the constantly changing UI. We're just building our own UI, right? And it's going to be a lot easier in that regard. So there was a lot of like, we sort of know what we're doing. We think we know anyway. And we're going to avoid some of those mistakes that were made the first time around. But trust us, like we have a vision here.
It is a really interesting thing because this is one of them. At least there's one difference when we talk about EU-based startups and like the American kind of style of funding a business, which is very, very interesting to me. And that is through how many conversations you go before you get a term sheet on your table.
Yeah.
And the reason why I mentioned the other thing before is that you would have to expect these kind of questions come up. I mean, now you're at Series C, you have a lot of experience, you've done your board meetings, all of this is fine. But you do expect these kind of questions come up if you have to stand in front of 50 people before you get a term sheet. That is really good. And this concept is really alien to a lot of European companies, which I find quite weird. Like also seed companies are like, oh yeah, like we have had already like four meetings, right? Like 4 meetings is nothing for funding.
Yeah.
And it's not so much that you need to have an answer for this particular question. It's just more like, did you think about it?
Yeah.
And it's not so much that they challenge you to see like, oh my God, like we're going to tell them something that they don't know about, or like, oh, this is impossible. You don't need to have an answer yet, but it helps you that that the founders, and also this is a people investment business. You're not investing into the technology, you're actually investing into the founders, right? So like in you and your brother and who else ever was also part of the executive team. But this is a very, very interesting thing because you will face all the time these kind of difficult questions. What if, right? And usually it's always like, what if Google starts to pay attention to your big market? What if Microsoft? What if this?
Yeah.
And you're integrated into this. So this is a quite interesting thing. So just maybe like one story that I can actually talk about right now that I've never talked about is I was once in a hiring process for Proton. So Proton is a Swiss-based company. Yeah, exactly. And they have an email client as well. And they position themselves, as an email client that is just secure, that's safe.
Yeah.
And the interesting bit is if you think about, okay, are they your competitors? And you would think like, yeah, maybe, maybe because it's an email and so forth.
They're on our competitive landscape spreadsheet.
Yeah, they are. But like, here's the interesting thing in terms of the positioning, right? So other tools that I've tried before this was Clay and some other CRM solutions, which I cannot remember right now. And I also don't want to give them any more airspace here. But because I was not looking for managing my emails. I was looking for how can I manage actually my contacts. And then finding something that actually helps me to, manage it already in the emails. This is also already kind of solving the problem. Yeah. The interesting bit that I know from NordVPN, because I was there in the discussion for creating a business case, was they said whenever there was something happening in the world, like some kind of data breach, like, I don't know, some bigger company gets leaked, like Ubisoft is getting hacked again, right? And then you have all of these wild news stories that your email has been hacked and so forth. Whenever something like this happened, Proton had a huge surge in their signups.
Right.
So it was quite difficult for them to actually do some growth predictions. Sure, you have also your natural flow, and then you have recommended, but no, people do tend not to kind of recommend security products.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh my God, Gaurav, I love the security of this product. I feel so safe, right? That's not what you're doing.
No, it's
Do you have something similar where you just say like, is it just like steady for you? Or is there something where you're just like, oh yeah, like we suddenly have a surge, for instance, appearing on the ProducTea with Leah, hopefully.
got a huge surge on this.
Huge.
I think that, from day zero, right, like our approach has been fundamentally different than Proton Mail from a product standpoint, right? Their thesis, and I love the thesis, right? Like I'm so glad that they're doing what they're doing. I think the world needs more of companies like Proton and NordVPN and so on, kind of doing what they're doing and helping us all as consumers, right, have better access to high quality security and privacy. Their thesis is to appeal to that one USP around security and to attract the kind of person for whom that is absolutely critical. So again, it could be a journalist working on really high profile stuff, or it could be, gosh, I don't know, kind of like tech executives who have like seriously important M&A going on or whatever it might be, right? We, from day zero, have been focused on the kind of person who has what we call the highest expectation of their email, the highest expectation in terms of volume throughput, in terms of how important it is to their job, speed, right? Like speed is the thing that we lead with from a value proposition point of view. You will do your email faster. You will therefore have more time back. You can then use that time for whatever you want. And the kind of person who cares about that often is willing to trade down on a feature like security if they're able to trade up on a feature like speed or responsiveness. We made an intentional choice to say, hey, we're not going to prioritize the security aspects in our messaging and our marketing. Superhuman we're SOC 2 compliant and we're incredibly secure in the way that we're architected, right? Like we keep a minimal amount of user information even on our side. A lot goes directly through the Gmail API back to Gmail. We don't want that data, frankly. It's a liability, and we don't want to have to handle a lot of that stuff. But we never actually market it, right? Like we don't actually talk in great detail about it because when you do, then you attract more scrutiny and attention to that
you position
feature.
yourself. Yeah, exactly. And you start to position yourself exactly against players who are doing it better, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like for less money. And it's like, okay, we don't want to be positioned in this way. And I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just what's incredibly difficult for me to understand is like, it's not difficult to understand, but like if you go back 5 years before these products would have really existed or had really good market traction as well, email is one of the things that I would never touch with a competitor's product because of the insane amount of pain that you have to go through of migrating your stuff out.
Yeah.
And this was also one of the main challenges that Andy, the CEO of Proton, also said. And said, like, look, migrating your stuff away from Google, like from the ecosystem, because you're not just like in Gmail, right? Like you have your calendar, you have all your contacts in there. Maybe you're connected with Google Hangouts and you have maybe a Calendly integration, all of this kind of stuff is incredibly, incredibly painful. Yeah. So this is one of the reasons, like, I mean, I love a challenge, as I said already, but like this would have been incredibly. So I'm actually very impressed that products like this do exist because it's just so difficult to navigate around it, and you're, as I said, dependent on Google in that regard.
Well, we've said, look, our growth strategy is to go for those highest expectation customers. Usually they're the founders, the leaders, the CEOs potentially of these companies. But because those companies are based in Google Suite or Office 365, we have our natural growth vector right there, right? Like they will love the product, hopefully, and then eventually refer and get their teammates on board, usually that the next layer of people who they work with, and then they will expand into their teams. So we kind of want to be in the ecosystem, right? We don't want to have to go through the pain and hassle of trying to migrate users, whether it's one at a time or whether it's a whole organization at a time. Like we want to be able to kind of easily and seamlessly spread within companies and just help those people do that work better, but by fitting like a glove, right? Like it's something that they shouldn't have to think much about just to get on board.
No. Yeah, it is interesting. And the space is right now also shifting, and like maybe also more from your personal side. I think regardless of whether this has to do with Superhuman or not, because you're also an advisor in this kind of space. The thing that you said about when people are willing to trade security or anything else, actually, like also stability for convenience. is something that is happening right now with AI. And I think we're not talking about this often enough when we talk about ChatGPT and so forth. An interesting bit is that whatever you put into ChatGPT is out in the open, right? Like the language model does learn from it, and then it's becoming accessible for others in some way or another, and that is a fact. And even though there's people are still putting their legal stuff in there, their medical history and everything, right? So like this is a prime example of exactly what you said before, and I think a lot of it is going to change quite dramatically. How do you personally look at this change and shift that we're going through right now, also from an AI's perspective? And I don't even going to ask you where the industry is going to be in 5 years, but like, where is it going to be in the next 2 years? How are we going to be impacted by this?
Yeah, I think before I answer that, there's another maybe less pernicious variant of what you said, which is that ChatGPT, I mean, I think that they're starting to release the features around verification and authenticity of the information. But a lot of people are quite happy trading down on truthfulness of what the LLM is telling them in favor of convenience, right? If it's faster to get the answer from them versus Gmail, then you'll go with the answer, even if it's like factually incorrect. And one of the companies I advise is actually like working on that problem because, you know, businesses depend on real and accurate information, or many businesses do. And ChatGPT just doesn't cut it in terms of actually giving you real information. But yeah, you raise arguably deeper in the iceberg, but a more pernicious and concerning challenge. I watched a talk recently by, I forget their names, I'm going to have to look it up and put it in the show notes, but AI researchers talking about the sort of galaxies colliding of like humanity with this next new wave of technology of LLMs and AI, and how there is more development and breakneck pace towards building new experiences and product than there is in terms of understanding the implications of the product and figuring out from a security point of view what's going on. I think it was some quite scary statistic, like only 1% of people working in AI are actually working on safety and security of AI. The other 99% are working on making more money for the companies that they work for in this arms race to get the products to market. It's a little bit like social media, where same thing happened 10 to 15 years ago. All these companies racing like absolutely nuts to become the next big social media platform. And of course, we are here where we are today with the likes of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and so on. But without recognizing or pausing to question what will that do to humanity, like our attention span, our children's, the desire to become a TikTok influencer being like the most sought after career in US teenagers, apparently, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And I think AI is going to be similar. So I think 2 years from now, it's going to be a tale of two parts. I think there'll be unimaginable leaps forwards. And by the way, disclaimer, right? Like, I'm not a crystal ball sort of prognosticator of what the future holds, but here's my...
None of us are.
Yeah. Here's my guess. Two things will be true. One, unimaginable leaps forwards. It's going to be incredible what is happening with this new technology 2 years from now. It's already incredible what's happening every single day as the year goes by, but there's going to be some amazing steps forwards. I think there's also going to be some appalling incidents. There will be, I suspect, more reactive than proactive measures against those. I personally hope that we're not at the level of appalling where it's like, you know, societally endangering. I think there is a risk, there is a percentage likelihood that could happen, but I think it's going to be more of the ilk of not societal level, but maybe a level or two down from that. And then there will be a lot of work and energy going into, well, how do we make sure that doesn't happen, right? Humanity has this thing where it's like we rush towards the new technology, the fossil fuels, and then like we work on correcting, or, you know, maybe too late, like we work on fixing the problems it generates after the fact, once we've actually seen them with our own eyes. And so 2 years from now, I think we expect that.
Until we actually feel it, right? And like in the case of climate change, I hope it's not going to be too late. Like, we don't know. So I think the interesting bit is, so we're also working in this space, even though what we do is we do weather forecasts on a couple of days ahead basis. And what we do is we're actually building a huge AI product, like absolutely insane amounts of data that you cannot read. Like I've heard versions of bytes that I've never heard before in a professional context, like petabytes, exabytes, you know, really, really crazy stuff. And if you think about the breakneck pace, it's not just that everybody's starting to build AI and machine learning stuff. And you need to be aware of that. If you're starting to build an AI products are complex in nature. You have a model that you need to train, you need to have access to the data and so forth, like even withholding the quality that you're getting at the end. But it is a challenging thing, so it takes a long time. the fascinating thing is that the underlying technology that makes models do what they do is innovating so fast that what you did 2 months ago based on the latest knowledge that we had is now old. It's inefficient. So everything that is running right now on these NVIDIA GPUs is completely different. If you just started to incorporate the newest research on like how to correct bias and so forth and going forward. And the interesting bit is that while all of this is happening and new products are coming out that we don't know exactly what's going to happen, regulation is still in its infancy, right? Like we have drafts on like what we should do and like what could be. And then you have the problem that if we are doing it, then the United States is not doing it. So they have a competitive advantage. Italy is kind of forbidding it, but then they're not. And the interesting bit there is that you would think, so two things. So you would think that why the hell is the EU, the European Union, making drafts where it really clearly says that all regulations that they do will exclude the military? This is what they say right now. So there's the military is excluded from any regulation in this regard. It's kind of a problem, I think, in one way. I'm not sure why you would do that. And I think the other thing is, if you're thinking about this convenience factor again that you said, medical advice is a very good example on how strong of a pull this time to value is versus the accuracy of an information. So technically you would say like, oh no, I don't want to have wrong medical advice because it's dealing with my own health, safety and so forth. But the fact of the matter is you're not competing against someone going into Google and typing in a search result, because usually people do not know what they have, right? So like they start to list symptoms and then, like here's my history and so forth, right? So like you can have personalized advice. But the main difference between you going to a doctor who unironically sometimes also goes to Wikipedia and checks stuff there, this has happened to me also when I was in consultations, is you're getting it in a minute. You don't have to pick up the phone. You don't have to deal with a PA that doesn't understand you. If you're in the States and you don't have health insurance coverage, right, you're also not going to get a big bill for this. This is convenience that is a bit crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's a bit crazy and it might not be accurate at all. And it's like you said, right? Like we don't know the ramifications of this. I personally am still on the side of, I think it's going to be good overall, like the good net. I hope so, because it's also going to give people access to really, really valuable knowledge that they just do not have access, specifically also in poorer parts of the world. Yeah. And I think it's going to equalize us globally much, much more than we can anticipate so far.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And as someone who works in productivity, I'm a big believer in if you help someone do something faster, you elevate them, you elevate the people who otherwise would be doing that work. And that time is then like freed up and can go into another task. My parents are both doctors, right? So I grew up surrounded by the medical profession. And I know that if they had this technology at their fingertips, like they wouldn't have just stopped doing what they're doing. Like they would have continued to work and they would have put their minds towards the next level of innovation within medicine with this tool at their fingertips so that they could help even more people more readily. So I'm optimistic of the same being true. But I very much hope with you that it is definitely the pendulum tilts on that side more than on the other side.
No. Yeah, I really think medicine is going to be the huge benefactor worldwide, where I'm absolutely not that worried about. Let's see how it comes out. Let's see how it all ends. We're ending, unfortunately, already the end. We have almost recorded an hour. So let me just ask you what you are looking for right now. Like, how can people get in contact with you? Should they get in contact with you? Should they get in contact with your fake brother over email? Or like, what is your preference?
Yeah, absolutely getting in contact with either of us over email or many other ways of getting in touch. I think, for me personally, I'm the most responsive on Twitter or LinkedIn. You can find me over on Twitter at Gaurav Vohra 1. I'm working on getting at Gaurav Vohra, but someone seems to be squatting that handle. I was very optimistic that when Elon was going to start cleaning up dormant accounts, that one would get freed up, but it seems to not yet have been freed up. So I'm still keeping an eye on it. I have a reminder every couple of months to go and check it. That being said, on LinkedIn, you can find me, Gaurav Vohra. Just look for my name and it will show up. Or you can get in touch over email if you want. I'm also at gauravvohra.com. And you can find out about my growth advising work and who I've worked with and various other bits and pieces over there as well. Yeah, would love to get in touch, say hello, find out if I can help in any way.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And I will put it into the show notes. And thank you so much for this hour spending with me. And I hope you also had fun.
Yes, absolutely. It was really fun. Thank you so much.
And I see you the next time.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to the ProducTea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.